December 11th, 1944. 23:55 hours. Ormoc Bay, Philippines. The shell screamed across the black water at 2,600 feet per second. 1.2 seconds later, it punched through the steel hull of a Japanese transport ship like a fist through wet cardboard. The explosion ripped a hole the size of a truck in the vessel's side. Water flooded the cargo hold at 2,000 gallons per minute. 300 Japanese soldiers began drowning in the darkness. The weapon that killed them was not a naval gun. It was not a torpedo. It was not a bomb dropped from an aircraft. It was an American tank. And the man who fired that shot was a 32-year-old accountant from Brooklyn named James Mackenzie, who had never seen combat until 2 months earlier and had absolutely zero training for fighting warships. What happened that night would become the only time in the entire history of World War II that armored fighting vehicles engaged and destroyed enemy naval vessels from shore positions. Not the Germans, not the Soviets, not the British, not the Japanese. Only one American infantry division figured out how to turn tank destroyers into ship killers. They sank 5 Japanese vessels in 18 minutes. They killed an estimated 750 enemy troops. They suffered 0 casualties. And they did it using weapons that were never designed to fight ships, and tactics that existed in no military manual anywhere in the world. This is the story of the 77th Infantry Division, the old bastards, the men who rewrote the rules of warfare because nobody told them they could not. But before we get to that impossible night, you need to understand why the 77th was in Ormoc Bay in the first place. You need to understand the desperate situation that forced ordinary men to attempt extraordinary things. You need to understand just how badly the Americans were losing the battle for Leyte. Because in December 1944, the Pacific War was hanging by a thread. The American invasion of the Philippines had begun on October 20th, with the largest amphibious operation in Pacific history. General Douglas MacArthur had promised to return, and he kept that promise when he waded ashore at Leyte Gulf, with photographers capturing every step. What the photographs did not capture was the nightmare that followed. The Japanese responded to the invasion with everything they had. General Tomoyuki Yamashita committed to making Leyte the decisive battle of the Philippines. He poured troops and supplies into the island through every port still under Japanese control. Between November 9th and December 11th, Japanese convoys delivered approximately 34,000 fresh soldiers to Leyte, despite devastating American air and naval attacks. The Americans tried to stop the reinforcements. Admiral Halsey committed Task Force 38. The 5th Air Force flew continuous interdiction missions. PT boats hunted Japanese barges in the shallow coastal waters every night. Destroyers patrolled the approaches to every major port. It was not enough. The Japanese kept coming. They lost 20 transport vessels. They lost 6 destroyers. They lost 1 submarine, 3 escort vessels, and 1 patrol boat. But they kept landing troops. Every night, more soldiers arrived to reinforce the defensive lines in the mountains. Every day, American infantry divisions paid in blood for every yard of ground they captured. The statistics were brutal. American forces on Leyte were killing Japanese soldiers at impressive ratios. But the enemy just kept arriving, faster than they could be destroyed. The campaign that MacArthur had expected to last weeks was stretching into months. Casualties mounted. Supplies ran short. The monsoon rains turned every road into a river of mud. And the port of Ormoc remained open. Ormoc was the last major harbor on Leyte's western coast still accessible to Japanese reinforcement convoys. It sat at the end of a valley that led directly into the mountains, where Japanese forces had established their main defensive positions. Every ship that reached Ormoc delivered fresh troops who would fight American soldiers within hours of landing. The Navy could not close Ormoc. Their ships were too large to operate safely in the shallow waters near the coast, and Japanese air attacks from nearby bases made naval operations extremely dangerous. Between October and December, the Americans lost 3 destroyers, 1 high-speed transport, and 2 LSMs trying to interdict the Japanese supply lines. The Air Force could not close Ormoc. Bad weather grounded aircraft for days at a time, and the Japanese had become expert at moving ships at night when American pilots could not find them. The only way to stop the reinforcements was to capture Ormoc itself. But Ormoc sat on the opposite side of Leyte from the American landing beaches. The mountain range that bisected the island blocked any direct approach. The Japanese had fortified every pass and every ridgeline. American divisions that tried to fight through the mountains suffered horrific casualties for minimal gains. The tactical situation seemed impossible. The Americans needed Ormoc, but they could not reach it overland, and they could not seal it from the sea. Every day the port remained open, more Japanese soldiers arrived to extend a campaign that was already consuming American lives at an unsustainable rate. But everything changed because of one infantry division that nobody expected to make a difference. The 77th Infantry Division was not supposed to be an elite unit. When the division reactivated in March 1942, the War Department expected it to be a standard infantry formation. Nothing special, no unique capabilities, just another division to feed into the Pacific meat grinder. The men who filled its ranks were exactly what you would expect from a division nobody cared about. They were civilians from New York and New Jersey, accountants, taxi drivers, factory workers. Men drafted because America needed bodies, not because they had any particular talent for warfare. Their average age was 32 years old. In an army where most infantry divisions averaged 22 or 23, the 77th was practically a retirement home. The younger soldiers in other units called them the old bastards, and the name stuck. But those old bastards had something the younger soldiers lacked. They had patience. They had life experience. They had learned through decades of civilian employment that charging ahead without thinking usually ended badly. They had families waiting for them at home and no desire to die heroically on some jungle island 10,000 miles away. Major General Andrew D. Bruce took command of the 77th in May 1943. He was 47 years old, a career artillery officer who believed in mathematics and firepower above all else. He looked at his division of middle-aged civilians and saw not limitations, but potential. Bruce trained his division differently than other commanders trained theirs. He emphasized fire discipline over speed, maneuver over frontal assault, conservation of force over heroic charges. The old bastards learned to let firepower do the work that young Marines did with bayonets. They learned to go around enemy strongpoints instead of through them. They learned to stay alive while killing the enemy efficiently. The training philosophy produced remarkable results. On Guam in July 1944, the 77th demonstrated exactly what Bruce's methods could accomplish. While other divisions charged Japanese positions and suffered massive casualties, the old bastards surrounded enemy strongpoints, called in artillery, and waited for the bombardment to finish before moving in to clear what remained. The casualty ratios heavily favored the Americans. The 77th killed enemy soldiers at rates far exceeding their own losses. By August 8th, Guam was secure, and the division had proven they could fight. More importantly, they had proven something that would become crucial at Ormoc. They had proven they did not care what the manual said. When the division landed on Leyte in November 1944, they brought M10 tank destroyers with them. The M10 was a strange vehicle. It mounted a 3-inch gun in an open-top turret on a modified Sherman chassis. Its official designation was 3-inch gun motor carriage M10. Its purpose was destroying German tanks in Europe. Nobody had ever intended the M10 to fight Japanese infantry in the Philippines. Nobody had ever imagined using it against naval vessels. The vehicle was designed for one specific mission: killing tigers and panthers on the battlefields of France. But the 77th Infantry Division had learned on Guam that the right tool for any job was whatever tool you had available. General Bruce received his orders on December 4th. The 77th would conduct an amphibious assault on the western coast of Leyte. They would land at Deposito, 3.5 miles south of Ormoc. They would fight north along the coastal road and capture the port. The Japanese would not expect an attack from the sea. They had concentrated their defenses against overland approaches from the east. An amphibious assault would catch them off guard and potentially end the reinforcement problem in days rather than weeks. Bruce studied the maps and calculated the odds. His division would be operating beyond the range of effective naval support. They would face Japanese forces that outnumbered them and held prepared defensive positions. They would need to capture Ormoc before the enemy could react and reinforce. The mathematics said it could be done if the division moved fast and hit hard. The 77th loaded onto transport ships on December 6th. They hit the beaches at Deposito at dawn on December 7th. 3 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, the old bastards were going to close the port that was keeping Japanese resistance alive. The initial landings went smoothly. The Japanese had not expected an attack from the sea, and their beach defenses were minimal. Bruce pushed his division north immediately, refusing to consolidate or wait for supplies. Speed was everything. Every hour of delay gave the enemy time to react. The advance was brutal but effective. The 77th fought through 23 miles of enemy positions in 72 hours. They destroyed Japanese strongpoints with concentrated artillery fire. They bypassed resistance when possible and crushed it with overwhelming force when necessary. By December 10th, the division had captured Ormoc. The town was rubble. Camp Downs was ash. The Antilao River ran red for 3 days from the bodies of Japanese soldiers killed in the fighting. But the port was in American hands. General Bruce established his command post 300 yards inland from the waterfront. He positioned his infantry regiments in defensive perimeters around the town. He brought forward his artillery and anti-aircraft units, and he positioned 3 M10 tank destroyers along the Ormoc waterfront, covering every approach from the sea. Bruce knew the Japanese would not abandon Ormoc without a fight. General Yamashita needed that port to continue reinforcing his troops in the mountains. The Imperial Japanese Navy would attempt to land more soldiers, probably at night when American air power was useless. When those ships came, Bruce intended to destroy them. The M10 crews received their orders on the evening of December 11th. They would track any vessels approaching Ormoc Bay. They would wait for illumination from mortar-fired flares. They would fire on command. Nobody knew if tank destroyer rounds would penetrate a ship's hull. Nobody knew if the Japanese vessels would return fire. Nobody knew if this insane plan would work. Corporal James Mackenzie checked his watch at 23:55, 5 minutes to midnight. Through the darkness, he could see shapes moving across the black water of Ormoc Bay. At least 5 Japanese vessels were approaching the shore, carrying an estimated 750 troops. Mackenzie was an accountant. He had spent 15 years adding numbers in a Brooklyn office building. Now, he was about to attempt something no tank crew had ever done in the history of warfare. The first flare went up at midnight exactly. But what happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about combined arms warfare. The mathematics of that engagement would prove that the old bastards had discovered something revolutionary. In Part 2, we will see exactly how those 15 shells from 3 tank destroyers sank 5 Japanese vessels in 18 minutes. We will witness the chaos of Japanese soldiers drowning in oil-slicked water, while American machine guns tracked them through the darkness. We will learn why General Yamashita stopped sending reinforcements to Ormoc after December 13th. And we will discover the devastating secret that made the 77th Infantry Division the deadliest unit in the Pacific War. December 11th, 1944. Midnight. Ormoc Bay. In Part 1, you met James Mackenzie, an accountant from Brooklyn, a man who had never fired a shot in anger until 2 months before this night. A man who was about to attempt something that existed in no military manual anywhere in the world. You saw the 77th Infantry Division capture Ormoc in 72 hours of brutal fighting. You learned why they called themselves the Old Bastards. You understood why General Bruce positioned 3 M10 tank destroyers along the waterfront. The first flare had just gone up. Transport number 159 was visible in perfect silhouette against the white phosphorus light. But firing a tank destroyer at a ship was not like firing at a tank. The M10's 3-inch gun had been calibrated for armored targets at ground level. Ships sat lower. Ships moved with the waves. Ships were surrounded by water that could deflect rounds at unpredictable angles. Nobody knew if this would work. And in exactly 18 minutes, the 77th Infantry Division would discover just how devastating their improvised coastal defense could be. The mathematics of that night would rewrite everything military planners thought they knew about combined arms warfare. Here is how it happened. The first flare burned for exactly 30 seconds. That was all the time the M10 crews had to acquire targets, calculate range, and fire. Mackenzie's crew had trained for tank engagements where targets moved at 20 miles per hour across open terrain. Transport number 159 was stationary, beached 970 yards from shore, unloading troops down ramps at bow and stern. The crew chief made the call. Fire! Mackenzie pulled the trigger. The M10's recoil threw the 17-ton chassis backwards 6 inches. The 3-inch armor-piercing round left the barrel at 2,600 feet per second. It crossed Ormoc Bay in 1.2 seconds. Direct hit. The shell punched through the ship's starboard side just above the waterline. The armor-piercing round had been designed to penetrate 3 inches of hardened steel armor at 1,000 yards. Transport number 159 had hull plating less than 1 inch thick. The round went through the hull, through the cargo hold, through dozens of Japanese soldiers packed for landing. It detonated against the port bulkhead. The explosion tore a hole the size of a delivery truck in the ship's side. Water poured into the cargo hold at approximately 2,000 gallons per minute. The vessel listed 7 degrees to starboard immediately. Japanese troops on the ramps froze. Soldiers inside the hold scrambled for exits. Officers screamed orders that nobody could hear over the rush of flooding water. And then the flare died. Darkness returned to Ormoc Bay. But the damage was done. General Bruce was watching from his command post 300 yards inland. He had seen tank destroyers eliminate bunkers. He had seen them destroy machine gun nests. He had never seen one cripple a ship with a single round. "Light them up again," he ordered. The second flare climbed into the sky 40 seconds after the first. The bay lit up in harsh white light. Transport number 159 was deeper in the water now, settling into the sand. The stern had dropped 3 feet. Troops were abandoning ship, wading through chest-deep water toward shore. The M10 crew made adjustments. The ship had shifted position. The range had changed slightly. Mackenzie's hands moved automatically, correcting elevation and deflection the same way he had done it 100 times in training. Fire! The second round hit below the waterline aft. It opened another breach in the hull. The Japanese vessel was now taking water from 2 separate holes. The rate of flooding exceeded any capacity to pump it out. Transport number 159 was doomed. But 4 more vessels were still approaching from the north. Mackenzie could see them clearly under the illumination. 3 barges and 1 larger transport. The Japanese captains were watching their lead ships sink. They were calculating odds. They had 700 troops to deliver. They had orders from General Yamashita himself. Retreat was not an acceptable option in the Imperial Japanese Army. The Japanese vessels kept coming. And that was when General Bruce made the decision that would turn Ormoc Bay into a killing field. "All guns," he ordered. "Fire at will." The Ormoc waterfront erupted. 6 40mm anti-aircraft guns from the 7th AAA Battalion opened fire at surface targets. Each gun could fire 120 rounds per minute. The effective range against surface targets was 2,000 yards. 50 caliber machine guns raked the Japanese barges with streams of tracer fire that turned the night into a deadly light show. Self-propelled howitzers from the 307th Infantry Regiment pumped 105mm high-explosive shells into the approaching vessels. And 3 M10 tank destroyers fired 3-inch armor-piercing rounds designed to kill Tigers and Panthers at ships designed to carry troops. The mathematics favored the Americans overwhelmingly. The Japanese vessels had no armor, no meaningful defensive weapons, no ability to maneuver in the shallow waters of Ormoc Bay. They were cargo carriers trying to deliver troops while being engaged by concentrated artillery fire from prepared positions on shore. The second Japanese transport took the first hit at 00:16 hours. An M10 round punched through the bow. The shell penetrated the forward hold and detonated among troops packed for landing. The explosion killed an estimated 40 soldiers instantly. The vessel kept coming. Japanese discipline held even under fire. The captain maintained course toward shore. His orders were to deliver troops, and he intended to complete his mission regardless of cost. The self-propelled howitzers fired next. 105mm high-explosive shells. These rounds were not designed to penetrate. They were designed to destroy everything within a 15-yard radius through overpressure and fragmentation. The first shell hit the transport's superstructure. The second hit the deck. The third hit the waterline and opened the hull like a can opener. The transport made it another 200 yards before the flooding became critical. The captain ran it aground 400 yards from shore. Too far for troops to wade, too shallow for the vessel to float. Japanese soldiers jumped into water over their heads. Many drowned immediately. The ones who could swim struck out for shore, while American machine guns tracked them through the darkness. The water turned red. Transport number 159 was completely submerged by 00:20 hours. Only the superstructure remained above water. Approximately 150 Japanese troops had made it ashore before the ship sank. Another 200 were in the water. The rest went down with the vessel. The Americans estimated 300 casualties from that ship alone, in 12 minutes. But the 3 barges were still coming. The Japanese captains had made a tactical decision. They scattered their vessels, hoping to split American fire. Each barge carried approximately 50 troops. Each barge drew less water and could operate closer to shore. It was a reasonable tactical decision. It failed completely. The 7th AAA Battalion had positioned 6 40mm guns along the waterfront. When those guns opened fire at 0:22 hours, the first barge simply disintegrated. 40mm rounds are explosive. They detonate on impact. When 50 explosive rounds hit a wooden barge in 12 seconds, the barge ceases to exist as a functional vessel. It becomes floating wreckage and body parts. The American gun crews watched the barge come apart like balsa wood under a hammer. Survivors in the water numbered less than 10. Machine gun fire found them there. The second barge tried to turn away. The helmsman put the rudder hard over and attempted to retreat into deeper water. The M10 crews tracked the movement. Mackenzie's M10 fired at 00:24 hours. The round hit the barge amidships and broke it in half. Both sections sank in less than 30 seconds. Japanese troops thrashed in the oil-slicked water. The searchlights found them. The machine guns followed. The third barge made it closest to shore. The captain drove straight at the beach at maximum speed, ignoring fire from every American position. 50 caliber rounds punched through the wooden hull. Mortar shells detonated in the water around it. The barge grounded in 3 feet of water, 70 yards from shore. Japanese troops poured over the sides and waded toward the beach. They made it 15 yards before the machine guns cut them down. The 77th Infantry Division had positioned interlocking fields of fire across every approach to the Ormoc waterfront. The Japanese soldiers waded into a killing zone with no cover and no supporting fire. They died in the water, all 50 of them. The engagement lasted 18 minutes. 5 Japanese vessels attacked, 5 Japanese vessels were destroyed. Estimated enemy casualties, 750 troops. American casualties, 0. General Bruce received the after-action report at 00:40 hours. One M10 tank destroyer had fired 7 rounds. Another had fired 5. The third had fired 3. 15 3-inch shells total. The self-propelled howitzers had expended 42 rounds. The 40mm guns had fired approximately 600 rounds combined. 15 shells from tank destroyers. 5 ships destroyed. 750 enemy killed. The mathematics told Bruce everything he needed to know about what would happen if the Japanese tried again. He sent his report to 24th Corps headquarters at 0100 hours. The message was characteristically brief. Enemy attempted reinforcement Ormoc Bay. 5 vessels destroyed. Request air reconnaissance at first light to confirm kills. The Corps commander read the report twice before he believed it. An infantry division had just defeated a naval reinforcement operation using weapons that were never designed to fight ships and tactics that existed in no military manual anywhere in the world. But the Japanese were not finished. General Yamashita still needed Ormoc. His forces in the mountains were running out of ammunition and food. Without reinforcement, they would be destroyed within weeks. He ordered another convoy. December 12th, 2200 hours. 2 barges approached from the north. American illumination rounds lit them up at 800 yards. The M10 crews destroyed both barges before they came within 500 yards of shore. Estimated casualties, 100 troops. American losses, 0. December 13th, 1 transport and 3 escort barges. The transport was larger than number 159, possibly 900 tons displacement. It carried an estimated 400 troops and heavy equipment. The American guns sank it in 12 minutes. The escort barges never made it within 1,000 yards of shore. Estimated casualties, 550 troops. American losses, 0. In 3 nights, the 77th Infantry Division had killed approximately 1,400 Japanese soldiers attempting to reinforce Ormoc. They had destroyed 9 vessels. They had suffered no casualties. General Yamashita stopped sending reinforcements to Ormoc after December 13th. The mathematics had become untenable. Every ship he sent was destroyed. Every soldier aboard was killed. The Americans had turned the Ormoc waterfront into a killing zone that even the Imperial Japanese Navy could not penetrate. The Japanese forces remaining in the mountains were now cut off from resupply and reinforcement. They would fight until they died, but they would not receive help. The 77th had won, but in Part 3, the story takes an unexpected turn. The United States Army conducted an official investigation in January 1945. The question was simple. Had an infantry division actually sunk enemy naval vessels using tank destroyers? The answer required verification, because nothing like this had ever happened in modern warfare. Tanks had never engaged warships. Tank destroyers had never fired at ships. The M10 was designed to kill armor, not sink transports. Navy divers would descend into Ormoc Bay to examine the wrecks. They would recover shell fragments from the sea floor. They would measure the holes in the hulls of sunken Japanese vessels. And what they found would confirm that the 77th Infantry Division had accomplished something truly unprecedented. But the investigation would also reveal something else. Something that the after-action reports had not captured. Something about the men who fired those shots and the price they would pay for their impossible victory. The old bastards were about to face their greatest challenge yet. Not from the Japanese, from the war itself. In Part 1, you watched James Mackenzie fire a tank destroyer round at a Japanese transport ship. In Part 2, you saw the 77th Infantry Division sink 5 vessels in 18 minutes, killing 750 enemy soldiers with 0 American casualties. Over 3 nights, the old bastards destroyed 9 Japanese ships and killed approximately 1,400 troops attempting to reinforce Ormoc. General Yamashita stopped sending convoys. The port was sealed. But when the after-action reports reached Washington, nobody believed them. An infantry division sinking warships with tank destroyers? Impossible. Tanks do not fight ships. That is not how warfare works. Someone must have exaggerated the numbers. Someone must have made a mistake. The United States Army ordered an official investigation in January 1945. What the investigators found at the bottom of Ormoc Bay would confirm the impossible had actually happened. And what they discovered about the 77th Infantry Division would reveal why these old bastards had become the deadliest unit in the Pacific War. The investigation team arrived at Ormoc on January 8, 1945. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Morrison led the inquiry. He was 41 years old, a career ordnance officer who had spent the war analyzing weapons effectiveness and combat reports. Morrison had read the after-action reports 3 times. He had examined the claims with professional skepticism. Tank destroyers sinking ships, infantry divisions defeating naval reinforcement operations, kill ratios that seemed mathematically impossible. He expected to find exaggeration. He expected to find fog of war confusion. He expected to write a report explaining that the 77th had probably damaged some barges and inflated their success for morale purposes. He was wrong. The first thing Morrison saw when he reached the Ormoc waterfront was transport number 159. The vessel was visible in 15 feet of water at low tide. The superstructure broke the surface like a metal gravestone. Navy divers went down on January 9th. They found 2 entry holes on the starboard side of the hull. Morrison watched them measure the holes from a small boat anchored above the wreck. The diameters came back at exactly 3.0 inches, consistent with M10 armor-piercing rounds. Both holes were below the waterline. The flooding pattern matched the timeline from the after-action reports precisely. First hit above the waterline at midnight. Second hit below the waterline at 0002 hours. Ship completely submerged by 0020 hours. The mathematics checked out. The divers moved to the second transport on January 10th. This vessel lay in deeper water, but still accessible. They found 3 penetrations in the hull, 2 from 3-inch rounds, 1 from a 105mm howitzer shell. The 3-inch rounds had gone completely through the vessel. Entry starboard side, exit port side. The shells had punched through the ship like it was made of paper. The divers recovered shell fragments from the seafloor. Morrison sent them to the metallurgy lab at Pearl Harbor for analysis. The results came back on January 18th. M10 armor-piercing rounds, manufactured in 1944 at the Watervliet Arsenal in New York. The investigation team examined the wreckage of 7 vessels over 12 days. They documented entry angles. They measured penetration depths. They photographed damage patterns. Every piece of evidence confirmed what the after-action reports had claimed. The 77th Infantry Division had indeed sunk multiple Japanese vessels using M10 tank destroyers firing from shore positions. Morrison wrote his conclusion with the careful precision of a man who understood he was documenting something unprecedented. This is the only confirmed instance in World War II of armored fighting vehicles engaging and destroying enemy warships. The only instance in the Pacific War. The only instance in the European War. The only instance in the entire global conflict. The Germans had never done it. The Soviets had never done it. The British had never done it. The Japanese had never done it. Only the 77th Infantry Division had turned tank destroyers into coastal defense guns and used them to sink enemy ships attempting amphibious landings. But the investigation revealed something else that the after-action reports had not captured. Morrison interviewed the M10 crews on January 12th. He wanted to understand how they had adapted so quickly to an engagement type they had never trained for. The answer was simpler than he expected. "We just did the math," Mackenzie told him. "Range to target, elevation correction, lead on a moving vessel. Same calculations we do for tanks. The ship was bigger and slower, actually made it easier." Mackenzie was still an accountant at heart. He had spent 15 years calculating numbers in a Brooklyn office. When he looked at transport number 159 through his gun sight, he did not see a ship. He saw a math problem. Range, 970 yards. Muzzle velocity, 2,600 feet per second. Time to target, 1.2 seconds. Deflection for ship movement, 0. Target stationary. Calculate. Aim. Fire. The round went exactly where the mathematics said it would go. Morrison asked about fear, about hesitation, about the strangeness of using a weapon designed for one purpose in a completely different way. "Sir," Mackenzie said, "we stopped caring about what the manual said on Guam. General Bruce taught us to use whatever weapon works. The M10 worked, so we used it." That philosophy defined the 77th Infantry Division. They were not elite soldiers. They were not special forces. They were middle-aged civilians from New York and New Jersey who had learned one fundamental principle. The right tool for any job is whatever tool you have available. But Morrison's investigation also uncovered the cost of that philosophy. The 77th had captured Ormoc on December 10th. They had sunk the Japanese vessels on December 11th, 12th, and 13th. By December 14th, they were already pushing north into the mountains. There was no rest, no celebration, no time to process what they had accomplished. The campaign continued. The killing continued. The dying continued. Colonel Aubrey Newman led the 307th Infantry Regiment north from Ormoc on December 14th. The regiment had provided the shore positions for the M10 crews. Now they were advancing into terrain the Japanese had spent months fortifying. The division moved through Kogon on December 15th, through Valencia on December 21st. The Japanese 1st Division tried to hold the Labongao Road junction. The 77th went around them, through terrain the Japanese considered impassable. They made contact with the 1st Cavalry Division coming south on December 25th. Christmas Day. Leyte was secure. The official campaign statistics told the story in cold numbers. The 77th Infantry Division killed 19,456 Japanese soldiers on Leyte. They captured 124. They lost 543 men killed and 1,469 wounded. The kill ratio was 36-1. But those numbers did not include the ships sunk on December 11th. They did not include the 750 enemy troops who drowned in Ormoc Bay. They did not include the convoys that never sailed because General Yamashita knew his ships would be destroyed before they reached shore. Morrison calculated the total impact: the reinforcements that never arrived, the supplies that never reached the Japanese defensive lines, the additional American lives that would have been lost fighting 1,400 more enemy soldiers in the mountains. The 18 minutes of combat on December 11th had probably saved more American lives than any other single engagement in the Leyte campaign. But the M10 crews received no special recognition. No medals were awarded for sinking ships. The action was considered part of the normal defense of Ormoc. The crews went on to fight through the rest of the Leyte campaign, and then shipped out for the invasion of Okinawa. General Bruce mentioned the engagement exactly once in his official memoirs. He wrote that the 77th had demonstrated unusual flexibility in employing all available weapons against enemy forces, regardless of whether those weapons were designed for the task. He considered this flexibility the defining characteristic of his division. The old bastards did not care what the manual said. They cared about killing the enemy as efficiently as possible. The tactical manual for the M10 was updated in March 1945. A new section was added: Employment against naval targets. The section was 3 paragraphs long. It noted that M10 rounds could penetrate unarmored vessels at ranges up to 1,000 yards. It recommended using armor-piercing rounds against waterline targets to maximize flooding. It cited the Ormoc engagement as the reference case. The update was mostly theoretical. The opportunity to use tank destroyers against ships never arose again. The Japanese stopped attempting major amphibious reinforcement operations after Leyte. The island-hopping campaign moved to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where Japanese defenders were already in place before American forces arrived. There were no more situations where enemy ships tried to beach themselves under American shore guns. The 77th deployed to Okinawa in March 1945. The M10 tank destroyers went with them. The division landed on Karama Reto on March 26th. Small islands west of Okinawa needed to be secured before the main invasion. The 77th spent 5 days clearing Japanese defenders and destroying suicide boat bases. American casualties: 27 killed, 81 wounded. Japanese casualties: over 650 dead or captured. The mathematics remained consistent. The main Okinawa operation began on April 1st. The 77th was held in reserve initially. They landed on Ieshima on April 16th. The island had an airfield the Americans needed. The Japanese had fortified every cave and ridgeline. The fighting was brutal. Hand-to-hand combat in tunnels, flamethrowers against bunkers, artillery barrages that turned hills into moonscapes. Ernie Pyle died on Ieshima on April 18th. The famous war correspondent had been with the 77th for weeks. He liked the old bastards. He wrote about them with respect. A Japanese machine gunner shot him in the head while he was moving forward with a reconnaissance patrol. The division erected a monument at the spot. The inscription read, "On this spot, the 77th Infantry Division lost a butt." Ernie Pyle, April 18th, 1945. Ieshima fell on April 21st. The 77th moved to Okinawa proper on April 25th. They relieved the 96th Division on the southern front. The Japanese defensive line stretched across the island. Fortified caves, interlocking fields of fire, artillery positioned in reverse slope positions where American naval guns could not reach them. The 77th attacked on April 28th. The Maeda Escarpment became the division's nightmare. A near vertical ridge that required scaling ladders and cargo nets to assault. The Japanese held the high ground with machine guns and mortars. Every yard gained cost American lives. The old bastards took the ridge the same way they had taken everything else. Sustained artillery bombardment. Methodical infantry assault. No heroic charges, no desperate attacks, just firepower and patience. The M10 tank destroyers provided direct fire support against Japanese bunkers. They destroyed fortified positions. They knocked out artillery emplacements. They did everything tank destroyers were designed to do. But they never sank another ship. The opportunity never came again. The division drove south to Shuri in conjunction with the 1st Marine Division. They occupied the ruins on May 31st. The Japanese had already withdrawn to their final defensive positions. The 77th continued attacking through June, sealing cave positions, clearing ridgelines, killing the enemy methodically and efficiently. Okinawa was declared secure on June 22nd. The 77th moved to Cebu in the Philippines in July to prepare for the invasion of Japan. Operation Downfall was scheduled for November 1945. The planners expected casualties in the hundreds of thousands. The atomic bombs fell in August. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The 77th never invaded the home islands. They occupied Hokkaido instead. Peaceful occupation. No combat. The old bastards had fought their last battle on Okinawa. The division was deactivated on March 15, 1946, in Japan. Final statistics for World War II. Approximately 44,000 enemy killed. 488 prisoners captured. 2,140 men killed in action. 7,000 wounded. 200 days of sustained combat across 3 campaigns. The capture rate remained 0.8%, the lowest in the Pacific War. The 77th Infantry Division had lived up to their reputation. They took no prisoners. They gave no quarter. They killed the enemy efficiently and went home. Most of them went home. 2,140 did not. But what happened to the men who fired those shots on December 11, 1944? What happened to James Mackenzie and the M10 crews who turned tank destroyers into ship killers? What happened to the old bastards after the war ended and they returned to their lives as accountants and taxi drivers and factory workers? In Part 4, we will follow the surviving members of the 77th Infantry Division back to civilian life. We will discover what they told their families about the war. We will learn why most of them never spoke about the night they sank Japanese ships with American tanks. We will visit the last surviving crew member of the M10 that destroyed transport number 159, a man named Robert Henderson, who died in 2003 without ever telling his family the story you have just heard. And we will understand why the night of December 11th, 1944, became a footnote in history that albeit most nobody remembers. The final chapter of this story is the one that matters most, because it answers the question that the statistics and the after-action reports and the official investigations cannot answer. What does it mean to do impossible things in war, and then come home to ordinary life? The old bastards knew the answer, and in Part 4, you will learn it too. In Part 1, you watched James Mackenzie fire a tank destroyer at a Japanese ship. In Part 2, you saw 5 vessels sink in 18 minutes. In Part 3, you learned that the official investigation confirmed what seemed impossible. The 77th Infantry Division had accomplished something that no military force in World War II had ever done before or would ever do again. They turned tank destroyers into ship killers. They sealed the port of Ormoc. They changed the course of the Leyte campaign. But what happened to the men who pulled those triggers? What happened to the old bastards when the war ended and they came home to wives and children who had no idea what their husbands and fathers had done? This is the part of the story that nobody tells. The part that matters most. Because the night of December 11th, 1944, became a footnote in history. The men who lived it became ghosts. And the truth about what they accomplished nearly disappeared forever. There is a final twist to the story that almost nobody knows, and it begins with a man who never spoke about the war. Robert Henderson was 26 years old on the night he helped sink transport number 159. He was the loader on Mackenzie's M10 tank destroyer. His job was to shove 3-inch armor-piercing rounds into the breach as fast as the gunner could fire them. He loaded 7 rounds that night, 7 shells that crossed Ormoc Bay and punched through Japanese steel. Henderson survived the rest of the Leyte campaign. He survived Okinawa. He survived 200 days of continuous combat and came home to New Jersey in 1946 with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, and a set of memories he would carry silently for the rest of his life. He got a job at a manufacturing plant in Newark. He married a woman named Dorothy in 1948. They had 3 children. He worked the same job for 35 years until he retired in 1981. His children knew he had served in the Pacific. They knew he had been in the 77th Infantry Division. They knew he did not like to talk about the war. They never knew he had helped sink Japanese ships with a tank. Henderson died on March 14, 2003. He was 84 years old. His grandson found the Bronze Star citation while sorting through his belongings after the funeral. The citation mentioned exceptional performance during the defense of Ormoc and engaging enemy naval vessels with tank destroyer fire. The grandson had never heard that story. Henderson had never told it. He had lived 57 years after the war ended. He had raised a family. He had watched his grandchildren grow up, and he had never once mentioned the night that his crew accomplished something unprecedented in military history. Why? The answer lies in what the old bastards understood about war that younger soldiers often did not. War is not about glory. War is not about heroism. War is about doing terrible things efficiently so that you can go home and never do them again. Henderson had loaded shells into a gun that killed hundreds of men in 18 minutes. Japanese soldiers who drowned in the dark water of Ormoc Bay. Japanese soldiers who burned when their barges exploded. Japanese soldiers who died in ways that Henderson probably saw in his nightmares for decades. He did not consider himself a hero. He considered himself a survivor. The 77th Infantry Division reunions happened every year in New York. The Old Bastards Club met at their headquarters on East 39th Street. They talked about Guam and Leyte and Okinawa in language their families never heard. They remembered names that had not been spoken in decades. They raised glasses to the 2,140 who never came home. But even at the reunions, nobody talked much about sinking ships. It was just another engagement. Just another night when they had used the weapons available to kill the enemy threatening their position. The M10 crews had fired 15 rounds and destroyed 5 vessels. Then they had moved on to the next mission. That was how the Old Bastards operated. Complete the mission, survive, go home. Henderson was the last surviving member of Mackenzie's crew when he died in 2003. The others had passed in the 1980s and 1990s. Mackenzie himself died in 1987 at the age of 75. None of them ever gave interviews about December 11th. None of them ever wrote memoirs. None of them ever sought recognition for what they had accomplished. They came home. They lived ordinary lives. They died as quietly as they had served. But the legacy of what they did that night lived on in ways they never knew. The tactical manual for the M10 was updated in March 1945. The new section on employment against naval targets was 3 paragraphs long. It cited the Ormoc engagement as the reference case. That update seemed like a footnote at the time. The opportunity to use tank destroyers against ships never arose again in World War II. But military planners remembered. In 1950, when North Korean forces invaded South Korea, American commanders studied every engagement from the Pacific War, looking for tactical innovations they could apply. The Ormoc engagement appeared in briefing documents at Fort Benning and Fort Knox. The lesson was not about tank destroyers specifically. The lesson was about flexibility, about using available weapons in unexpected ways, about refusing to accept that a tool designed for one purpose could not serve another. That philosophy became embedded in American military doctrine during the Cold War. When planners designed coastal defense systems for NATO, they included provisions for armored vehicles to engage enemy landing craft. When the Marine Corps developed amphibious assault tactics, they incorporated shore-based direct fire against approaching vessels. The 77th Infantry Division had proven a principle that military theorists had debated for decades. Concentrated shore fire could defeat amphibious operations even without naval support. The mathematics that Bruce calculated on the night of December 11th became the foundation for defensive doctrine that protected coastlines across the Western world. Nobody called it the Ormoc Doctrine. Nobody credited the Old Bastards by name. But the tactical innovation they demonstrated under fire influenced military thinking for generations. The M10 tank destroyer was retired from American service in 1957. The last operational M10s served with foreign armies into the 1960s. Transport number 159 remained on the bottom of Ormoc Bay. The wreck is still there today, 80 years later, invisible under 15 feet of water and decades of silt. Divers occasionally visit the site. Filipino fishermen know the location. Local guides tell tourists that American tanks sank Japanese ships there during the war. Most tourists do not believe them. Tanks do not sink ships. Everyone knows that. But the evidence is still there. 2 3-inch holes in a rusted hull. The mathematical proof of an impossible night. The story of the 77th Infantry Division raises questions that extend far beyond military history. How does innovation happen in rigid institutions? How do ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things? Why do the most important breakthroughs often come from outsiders who do not know they are supposed to fail? The old bastards were not elite soldiers. They were accountants and taxi drivers and factory workers who happened to be too old for the prestigious divisions and too stubborn to accept that their age made them inferior. General Bruce gave them permission to think differently. He taught them that the manual was a guide, not a prison. He showed them that the right answer was whatever answer worked. That philosophy produced results that elite units with superior training and equipment could not match. The 77th killed 44,000 enemy soldiers across 3 campaigns. They captured fewer than 500 prisoners. They maintained a kill ratio that no other division in the Pacific could approach. They did it by refusing to accept limitations that other commanders considered absolute. History is full of similar examples. The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics who taught themselves aerodynamics. Alexander Fleming was a messy scientist who discovered penicillin by accident. Alan Turing was a mathematician who built machines that cracked codes considered unbreakable. Innovation rarely comes from the center of institutions. It comes from the edges, from people who are too inexperienced or too stubborn or too desperate to accept that something cannot be done. The old bastards did not know they could not sink ships with tanks, so they did it anyway. That is the real lesson of December 11th, 1944. Not the tactics, not the weapons, not the mathematics. The lesson is that impossible things become possible when someone decides to try. There is one final detail about this story that almost nobody knows. In 2012, a Filipino historian named Rafael Santos was researching the Battle of Ormoc for a book about World War II in the Philippines. He found the after-action reports in the National Archives. He read the investigation documents. He studied the evidence that Morrison had collected in January 1945. And then he found something that the American investigators had missed. Among the Japanese records captured after the war, Santos discovered a report from the commander of the convoy that attempted to reinforce Ormoc on December 11th. The report was written by a junior officer who survived the sinking of transport number 159. He had been on deck when the first shell hit. He had jumped into the water when the ship began to sink. He had watched his comrades drown in the darkness, while American guns continued firing. His account matched the American after-action reports almost exactly. The timing, the sequence of hits, the chaos of the sinking. But his report contained one detail that the Americans never knew. Transport number 159 was carrying more than troops that night. It was carrying the regimental colors of the Japanese 35th Army, the sacred banners that represented the honor of the unit. When the ship sank, the colors went down with it. In Japanese military tradition, losing the regimental colors was the ultimate disgrace. It meant the unit had failed completely. It meant the ancestors were ashamed. The 35th Army never recovered those colors. They never recovered from the loss. The old bastards did not just sink a ship that night. They destroyed the spiritual heart of an entire Japanese army. Santos published his findings in 2015. The book received little attention outside the Philippines, but the detail he discovered adds a layer of meaning to the story that even the men who fired those shots never understood. They did not just kill 750 soldiers. They broke something deeper, something that the mathematics could not measure. 80 years ago, On a December night in the Philippines, a Brooklyn accountant named James Mackenzie fired a tank destroyer at a Japanese ship. He had no training for that shot. He had no manual that told him how to do it. He had only the skills he had learned and the weapons he had available and the determination to complete his mission. The shell crossed Ormoc Bay in 1.2 seconds. It punched through the hull of transport number 159. It began a chain of events that would sink 5 vessels, kill 750 enemy soldiers, seal a port, and change the course of a campaign. 15 shells, 18 minutes, 5 ships destroyed, 0 American casualties. That is the mathematics of the impossible night. The cold calculation of what the old bastards accomplished when nobody believed they could. But the numbers do not capture what matters most. What matters is that ordinary men did extraordinary things because they refused to accept that ordinary men could not do extraordinary things. What matters is that they came home afterward and never sought glory for what they had done. What matters is that their story nearly disappeared into the silence of history, known only to a few researchers and Filipino fishermen who point at the water and say that American tanks sank Japanese ships there during the war. Now you know the story too. If you know similar stories of forgotten innovation and impossible courage, share them in the comments. History is full of old bastards who changed the world and never told anyone. Subscribe to discover more stories like this one. Stories about ordinary people who refused to accept that impossible things were impossible, because that refusal is what makes history. The night of December 11th, 1944 happened once. It never happened again. It was the only time in the history of warfare that tanks sank ships. And the men who did it went home, lived quiet lives, and took their memories to the grave. But their legacy remains. In the rusted hull on the bottom of Ormoc Bay, in the tactical manuals that changed how nations defend their shores, in the principle that the right tool for any job is whatever tool you have available. The old bastards taught the world that limitation is a choice, and that ordinary people, given permission to think differently, can accomplish things that seem impossible. That is the power of refusing to read the manual. That is the lesson of the men who sank ships with tanks. And that is why, 80 years later, their story deserves to be remembered.